I hope this is as interesting to you as it was to me, because it's definitely made me think about some things that I need to pay closer attention to. I don't know if this is going to work, but let's do this. Describe heaven to me. The Bible lists off all sorts of things about what heaven will look like and be like and all that stuff. And you don't have to give me book, chapter, verse, or anything. Don't look anything up. Just, what do you know? What do you remember?
Wonderful, beautiful.
Okay. Streets of gold. Sorry?
Pearly gates.
Pearly gates.
Singing angels.
Singing angels. Yep. We're doing great. No pain, no tears. Joy.
Eternal worship, singing. We'll all have amazing voices.
I don't know if that's true. They'll all be pleasing to the Lord, I know that. But that's already the case right now. But. Anything else? We could probably do it all day. There's hundreds. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that should be the most important thing about heaven, not the place, but the presence of who we are, or whose presence we are in. Anything else anyone wants to tack on? What does heaven look like?
You know, one thing is that I hope we get to see heaven. Because I don't want to come to the other place.
True, yeah. I don't want you to go there either, dude. Anything else? When you get to chapter 21, like we talked about last week, the world of the wicked that's been working through Rome, or the Roman Empire at this time, it's been dismantled. It's destroyed. That work there is done, right? As we've said in the weeks prior to that, we haven't seen the last of Satan, right? So there will be more destruction and danger and sin in the future, but as far as the work being done in the Roman Empire, well, the Roman Empire has been destroyed. And the world of those who have served the beast, the economy, the money they were making, the joy that they had, and the success, that's been dismantled. That process has been destroyed in the Roman Empire. But as we've been focusing lately very heavily on the destruction of the beast, think back to the beginning of Revelation and who John is writing to and what's been going on throughout this whole thing. Through the midst of God's judgment on Rome, the Lord's church has suffered much. You think back to the letters to the 7 churches, and we see some of the suffering that's already happened and what's bound to happen in the future. The saints have been persecuted. They've really been made sport of in some cases, and many of them have been killed. But we see throughout Revelation sort of this celebration that the church has yet remained faithful throughout these things, and it's made them a beautiful bride. It's made the church a beautiful bride in the eyes of God. And in the last 18 chapters, or last 18 verses of chapter 21, that's what we're going to see and spend a bit more time focusing on. And the reason I bring up heaven is because of what is mentioned in verse 9 that we need to be aware of. And like I said, it catches me off guard as well. So, a couple things as we dig into it, right? We've had in the past chapters the language of, kind of cryptic writing, right? We see a new heaven and a new earth, but we've seen that all throughout Isaiah. So this would be considered a language of blessing. We've already talked about the wedding and the wedding feast. That was a few weeks back as well. This is a vision, right? I've said that every time, I think. It's a vision. So this is not something that is literally going to take place, but is symbolic of a deeper meaning. So verse 9, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, and I shall show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." So, that's what you need to remember as we go through these next 18 verses, 17 verses. Angel who was holding the 7th bowl, or one of the 7 bowls, the 7 plagues, comes to John and says, "Hey, come with me. I want to show you the bride. I want to show you the wife of the Lamb." So there's no reason to doubt or speculate what John is going to write, what he sees. So as we're reading these next verses, John is seeing the bride, right? And again, we know already through past chapters, Ephesians chapter 5 is also another good one, 22 through 33, that the bride of Christ, or the wife of the Lamb, it's the church, right? "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God." So the angel takes John to see the bride, which is the church, and he sees it coming down out of heaven, the holy city Jerusalem, having the glory of God. There's a few descriptors there that are important to note. So the bride of Christ and this holy city Jerusalem coming down are one and the same. And again, we've seen this already in Revelation, but it's coming down from heaven, which means it's from God, right? And as you, if you'll remember, the Roman Empire had its origin with men that came from man, but the church's origin is in heaven. And he says that the holy city Jerusalem had the glory of God. So, and this is going to come up in our lesson later this morning, but just as Jesus came and reflected the image and reflected the glory of his Father, so does and so should the wife. So should the church also be, because it comes from heaven, comes down from heaven, it's from God, so it should also be a reflection of the glory of God. And so that's what the angel is showing John. That's what John sees. They go and see, here's the holy city Jerusalem. It's coming down from heaven. Its origin is from heaven, and it's reflecting the glory of the Father. And so that is its purpose. That is the characteristics of the church, of the wife, of the Lamb. Its origin is in heaven, and it reflects the glory of the Father. Verses 11 through 13. "Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. It had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names were written on them, which are those of the 12 tribes of Israel." We're going to see that a lot here, obviously, but 12, 12, 12, 12, 12. That's how many gates there are. There's 12 gates, and if you'll remember, 12 is the totality of God's people. It represents the totality of God's people. And the name of those on the gates are the names of the 12 tribes. And so everything about this holy city with these 12 gates and these names on the gates is marking out the city of God's people. The angel has taken John to see the church, God's people, all of God's redeemed. Verses 13 through 14. "There were 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the west, and the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb." So again, we've pretty well established that 12 is the totality of God's people, and so there's 3 gates here, 3 gates there, 3 gates here, and then 12 foundation stones. In Ephesians chapter 2, remember that was the first sermon of the year, basically. "You are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets. Christ Jesus himself was the cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit." The Christians we read about in Ephesus were built on the foundation of what the apostles and prophets brought through, or what the apostles and prophets taught. Christ Jesus is the cornerstone. He's the one that they stood on. And we're all being built into the household, the family, the church. That is the dwelling of God in spirit. And that's what the church is, and that is what John is seeing with these gates and these names. So it's a glorious image of the church here. All right. So listen to these next few verses. And the one who spoke with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its wall. And the city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as the width. And the measure of the city, and he measured the city with the rod, 1,500 miles. Its length and width and height are equal. And he measured its wall 72 yards, according to human measurements, which are also angelic measurements. One of the wildest sentences in the Bible that I've ever read. And then verse 16, but I'm going to read it in King James Version. And the city lieth 4 and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. I just think it's wild that John says he uses human measurements, which are the same as angelic ones. Thanks. Just a wild sentence. My mind goes all sorts of places. The city is 4, which means it's cubed, like the Holy of Holies. And in the King James Version, what it says is it's 12 furlongs. So again, we have the number 12 come up, right? The number of God's people. So this city is 12 high, 12 long, 12 wide. Everything about the measurement and the gates and everything that John is seeing is a picture of the church. And he measured its wall 72 yards, according to human measurements, which are also angelic measurements. Again, I don't have great words to give you there. But 72 yards is 6 by 12, so there's 12 again. The King James Version says he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. That doesn't help any more than the other version there. 144 equals 12 by 12. So, again, 12. God's people. So all these measurements all these measurements indicate that this is the city of God's people, or the church. And so the reason I brought up heaven at the beginning, you've probably already caught on, but the reason I brought up heaven in the beginning, and the reason why we're hitting on this so hard, is because a lot of what's mentioned in Revelation chapter 21 is used to describe heaven. But that is not where that's not what the angel has taken John to see. The angel hasn't taken John to see heaven. The angel has taken John to see the church. And these are all symbolic things describing the church. You might be with me here on that. You may still not be quite sure, or may not be quite so certain. But that's just something that, and we'll keep reading because we're going to get to arguably one of the harder things where I have to pronounce a bunch of stones that I have never heard of before. But Revelation chapter 21, whether you know it's from Revelation 21 or not, we use these verses subconsciously, and I don't think that I heard any, but maybe I did. But we kind of use these subconsciously to say, oh, heaven will be like, and we describe it with all these jewels and all these things. Well, that's from Revelation chapter 21, where John is seeing the church, not heaven. Just something that I think is neat. And again, I do the same thing where I quote Revelation 21 to describe the magnificence of heaven, when in reality the angel is showing John the magnificence of God's people, which is interesting. If you put pencil to paper on all those numbers that I gave you, if you take 12,000 furlongs, which by today's measure is 1/8 of a mile, that makes 12,000 furlongs, 1,500 miles. So you take 1,500 and you have 3,375,000,000 cubic feet. So the highest mountain in the world, I think, is 6 miles high, Mount Everest. And that would make this 250 times taller than Mount Everest, what's being measured out and described here. That is compared to Rome, which would never fall because it's big and powerful and influential, this great big nation. That compared to the city Foursquare, that is 250 times taller than the tallest mountain we have today, that city will never be conquered. I mean, that's massive. And again, we understand John is seeing the church. That's the measurement of the church. And so the measurements are symbolic of this holy, glorious, and extremely secure and impenetrable dwelling of the people of God and God in the Spirit. No one will crash those gates. No one and nothing is going to bring that city down. It's huge. There's just no way. It's not feasible. No one will climb those walls, and the people who dwell inside the city Foursquare have nothing to fear. Those in the church. That's been the lesson. That's been our takeaway, and that's been the takeaway for the original readers of Revelation throughout the entire book is, listen, it's scary. Some of you are dying. There's persecution. Life is rough. There will be more suffering as the nation around you crumbles and the economy goes away and fish in the sea are killed and those sorts of things. But if you're in the church, if you belong to Christ, if you're faithful to God, you still have nothing to worry about. This thing is as big as it is wide, and there's nobody crashing the gates or getting in there. Right? I've quoted this a lot through Revelation, but they can kill body, but they can't kill soul. It's impenetrable there. You can make the decision to walk out of those gates. But if you're in there, and if you'll stay there, that's as safe as it gets. And that's the message in Revelation to Christians then, and that's very much the message to you and I today. It's the same takeaway, largely. Rome just thought it was strong and powerful, but it's nothing compared to the church. Nothing is comparable to the power of God's church. So the next 3 verses, like I said, bear with me because, well, let's see you do better. Okay? The material of the wall, I already mispronounced the word material, so that's a good start. The material of the wall was jasper. The city is pure gold, like clear glass. See, this is not good. These are the easy ones. I'm so scared. The foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, probably not, right? The fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, the 12th amethyst, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each one of the gates was a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold like transparent glass. I did hear streets of gold earlier. Thank goodness nobody said chrysolite, I think is... So these are verses, again, the streets of gold and other things like that are often referred to as a picture of heaven. That's not where the angel has taken John to go see. Let me show you the bride, and that's what the bride looks like. That doesn't make what John is seeing here and what we're reading any less significant. It's just interesting to me that I would quote this all the time too. Just heaven is going to be, just the imagery of all these beautiful stones and jewels and, amethyst and the ones I can pronounce and the ones I can't, and it's, just so beautiful, is actually a description of us in the church and not heaven. Again, that doesn't make heaven insignificant. That doesn't make the church more significant or less than where God is dwelling. It's just interesting to me that we kind of misplace where that verse goes or what it's describing sometimes. But if that being said, if people fully understood just how precious the church is to God, then I would suspect more people would want to be added to it, and those who are a part of the church would be more inclined to stay in it. And if you and I, as God's people, would understand how precious the church is in the sight of God, I think it would affect our willingness to work in it and to serve in it. And I think we would be a lot more careful about damaging it. Again, I don't know what half of these stones and gems are, but if I had any of them here and passed them around the room, I hope that you would be very careful with them. Again, heaven is wonderful and will be, by far the best place to spend eternity compared to the other, right, Frank? But, right, and as Dustin said, the best part about heaven is not the place, but rather whose presence we're in, which is that we will be in the presence of God for all eternity. That's what makes heaven great. But what's being described here by all of these jewels is not heaven, it's the church. It's us. That's how God sees the church. And so it may be, I'm not saying that this is why there's so much conflict in the church, and why it splits so often is because we keep forgetting that this verse is about the church and not heaven. Obviously there's other problems going on, right, within man that cause issue there. But maybe it would help for us to consider that these stones and these gems and the streets of gold and all these beautiful things are a description of the church. And so it's not some far off place that you and I aren't there yet. We're already here. We're already in this place. We are already the church. So maybe we would handle it with a bit more care as to not damage these things. That's how beautiful God sees the church. So for goodness sake, right, let's handle it with a bit more care. Verse 22, moving on. We're just about done here. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God the Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. That's significant just because if there was a temple in this holy city, then that would speak of still a separation between God and his people. God is here, the people go into the temple in order for there to be some sort of connection there. But that's not what John sees. In the Old Testament, right, they had a holy place in the temple there, where people could not go. You can't go into the holy place in the temple in the Old Testament. And the only ones that could go were the high priest, and the high priest could only go into that holy place once a year. So pretty wide separation there between God and his people. So that's what the temple is a little bit symbolic of. John sees no such temple in this city. There is no separation here. In this city, if you belong to the church, you are always in the presence of God and with his people. And that's a privilege that those who are citizens of the church only possess. And the city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. So again, we when I think about heaven, and I'm not saying that this is wrong either, but I always talk about, there is no night there is no darkness, and that's certainly true. But a lot of that quote comes from verse 23 here, talking about there's no need for the sun because God illumines it. But again, we're not talking about heaven, we're talking about the church. So the world might stumble in darkness, but the church does not. because the church is very well lit. And as such, then, the church should be a light itself, shining so that hopefully others will see. The nations, here it is, the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of earth will bring their glory into it. Before, the nations thought that Rome was the hope of the world. They're steering the ship. But that's not true. In the church lies the hope of the nations. And if they're walking in any sort of light, they're walking in the church's light. That's illumined again by the Lamb. The church that Rome hates and despised and beats and kills is now the city on a hill, a beacon by which the nations are led to safety if they will follow that light. And in the daytime, for there shall be no night there, its gates shall never be closed, and they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it, and nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. In the next chapter, in verses 14 and 15, there's a brief commentary on what we just read. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter by the gates into the city. Outside are the dogs and the sorcerers and the immoral persons and the murderers and the idolaters and everyone who loves and practices lying. Again, this is not a descriptor of heaven. The angel has taken John to see the church. And so now, as we kind of close out this chapter here, no one who is unclean or who practices abominations and lying, no one who is a dog or a sorcerer, or who is immoral, or a murderer, idolater, a practicing liar, enters into that city, the 12 by 12 by 12, God's people. You can't be a member of the church if you have not been washed. That's why it's essential for you to be washed and made holy, so that then at that point you can enter into the city foursquare, which is not heaven, although you obviously need to be washed clean to enter into heaven. But those who enter into heaven will only be the Lord's church. And if you want to be in the Lord's church, you cannot be unclean. You must be washed. 1 John 1 verse 7, there's a lot of verses I could quote here, but 1 John 1:7 tells us pretty plainly that it's the blood of Christ that cleanses us from all. You can be washed, you can be white, pure as snow, only by the blood of Christ. The blood of bulls and the blood of goats won't do it. It's just the blood of Christ that can cleanse. And Acts chapter 22, verse 16 tells us exactly when the cleaning takes place. And now why do you delay? Arise and be baptized and wash. Arise, be baptized, and thus wash away your sins. I'm not offering an invitation here, although you guys can come forward anytime you want. That's how it works. But just some interesting thoughts there in Revelation 21 that, while I've done this study before, is something that I forget, and is maybe something that you forget or maybe didn't know. But the descriptive language here of the city foursquare and the pearls and the gates and the streets of gold and all these things, the very beginning of this chapter is the angel saying, let me show you the church. And those are all descriptors of the Lord's church, not heaven. And then, of course, comes to a pretty neat close there at the end, and that, simply put, there is no better protection, there is no better safety than in the walls of this city. And if you want to get into that city, You can't be unclean. You must be washed. That's all I've got this morning. Any thoughts?